The night Corbet came to collect what she owed him, Lina was already bleeding. Not from anything dramatic, not the kind of bleeding that makes a story. It was a cut along the heel of her left hand, where the edge of a filing cabinet had caught her, when she reached for a folder in the dark, too tired to turn on the overhead light, too stubborn to admit she'd been working in that storage room for 11 hours without a break. The kind of tired that makes you clumsy. The kind of tired that she'd been living inside for so long she'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the smell of your own apartment. She'd wrapped it with a strip of paper towel and a rubber band and kept going. That was 3 weeks before everything changed. Lina Vrett worked for Corbet Ashmore the way a lot of people worked for men like him. Carefully, quietly, and with the full understanding that asking too many questions was a fast route to unemployment at best. She'd been his head accountant for 2 years. She handled the legitimate books for Ashmore Holdings, which operated 11 businesses across Halifax, none of them wildly profitable on paper, all of them useful. She did not ask why 3 of those businesses ran at consistent losses while still somehow retaining full staff. She did not ask why certain line items came in at numbers so round they looked invented. She filed what she was given, kept the columns clean, and she was very, very good at it. Ashmore paid her fairly, not generously, fairly, which, in Lina's experience, was actually rarer than people thought. She'd taken the job out of desperation, 2 months out of a contract at a shipping firm that had folded abruptly under circumstances that showed up later in a financial crimes investigation that she'd had nothing to do with, but which had, nonetheless, made her unemployable in conventional accounting circles for about 18 months. Nobody wanted someone with that name attached to that company on their payroll, regardless of what the investigator's final report said. She'd sent out 47 applications. She'd gotten 12 interviews. She'd gotten 1 offer, Ashmore's. She'd sat across from his office manager, a lean, humorless man named Decker who communicated mostly in monosyllables and answered every question precisely and honestly and with the particular kind of composure you develop when you've already hit the bottom and realized it's not as soft as you'd feared. She didn't apologize for the shipping company. She didn't explain more than was asked. She said, "I know what I'm doing. I keep clean books. I don't talk about what I see." Decker had looked at her for a long moment. He'd offered her the job the next morning. She never actually met Ashmore during those first 2 years. His signature appeared on her employment contract. His name was on the lease for the office she worked in, a 3rd-floor walk-up in the north end of Halifax, above a dry cleaner that never seemed to have customers. She reported to Decker. Decker reported to someone. The numbers got processed, the books got filed, and Lina went home each evening to her apartment in Dartmouth. The one with the radiator that only worked when it felt like it, and the bathroom tiles she kept meaning to replace, and ate whatever was cheapest at the grocery store and went to sleep early, because she'd be back at the desk by 7 the next morning. She wasn't unhappy. She wasn't happy either. She was functional, which was what she'd settled for. Then the autumn the numbers stopped adding up. Everything shifted. It started with a discrepancy in the receivables for the Ashmore Marine Supply Company down at the pier. Small thing, on the surface, $42,000 that appeared in the records in August, and then, in September, simply wasn't there anymore. Not moved, not applied to anything, just gone, the way a word disappears from your mouth right before you say it. Lina flagged it to Decker. Decker told her to leave it. She left it for 4 days. Then she pulled the records again, traced it back through 3 different holding accounts, and found something she genuinely hadn't expected to find. Evidence that someone had been running a second set of books inside the marine company for at least 14 months. Parallel records. Same transactions, different numbers. The kind of work that requires patience and a facility with figures that Lina recognized immediately, because she'd once been trained by the woman who invented the method. Her predecessor, who had, according to Decker, left for a position in Vancouver. Lina had never questioned that. She was questioning it now. She printed nothing. She saved nothing to any drive that touched the company network. She memorized what she needed to memorize, which she was capable of doing because numbers, for Lina, had always behaved like photographs. She could pull them up whole and intact whenever she needed them. Then she closed the file, logged out of the system, and sat in the empty office for a long time looking at the wall. She was thinking about her predecessor. She was thinking about Vancouver. She was thinking about what it meant that someone inside Ashmore's operation was running a shadow ledger, and who that someone might be, and whether Decker knew, and whether the fact that she knew meant she was now a liability in a way she hadn't been 20 minutes ago. She went home. She ate rice and frozen peas. She did not sleep. She'd been trying to decide what to do about it for 3 weeks when Ashmore walked through her office door. Lina knew who he was the moment he came in, which was strange, because she'd never seen so much as a photograph. But there's a particular quality to men who are used to a room rearranging itself around their presence. A stillness that isn't calm exactly, more like the moment before weather. He wore a dark coat, the kind with a structured shoulder and no unnecessary detail, and he filled the doorway in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size, and everything to do with what walked in with him. He wasn't alone. 2 men came in behind him and then positioned themselves near the door without being asked, the way objects settle under gravity. It was 9:30 on a Wednesday evening. Lina had been in the office since 8 that morning. Her coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, and she'd drunk it anyway. She was in the middle of a reconciliation, and her hair was coming out of whatever she'd put it up in that morning, and she was wearing a sweater with a frayed cuff that she'd been meaning to get rid of for 6 months. Ashmore looked at her. He had grey eyes. Not the soft grey people describe as kind, the grey of unpolished steel. He'd been in some kind of accident, years ago maybe, judging by the faint pull of scar tissue along his jaw and the way he held his right hand slightly differently from his left, not disfigured, just marked. The face of someone who had passed through something and come out the other side with all the softness ground off. He said, "You're Lina Vrett." It wasn't a question. His voice was lower than she'd expected, measured. "Yes," she said, which was either a mistake or the only honest response available to her, and she hadn't yet decided which. He looked at the papers on her desk, at the cold coffee, at her frayed cuff. His expression gave away exactly nothing. "I've been in your books," he said. "The last 6 quarters." Lina waited. "They're clean," he said, and the word landed with a weight that made her understand he didn't use it lightly. "Cleaner than they should be, given what you were working with." "I do my job," Lina said. "Decker tells me you flagged the marine company receivables." "Yes." "He told you to leave it." "Yes." "And then you pulled the file again 4 days later." He'd been watching, or someone had. She filed that information away without changing her expression. "Yes." A pause. He was assessing her the way she imagined he assessed most things, with the kind of patience that comes from never needing to rush. "What did you find?" Lina looked at him for a moment. She thought about lying. She was good at a lot of things, but lying to a face like that, eyes like that, felt like a bet she couldn't afford. "A second set of books," she said. 14 months. The method is Hargrove standard. Your previous accountant, I assume." Something shifted in the room, not in his expression, in the air. "Her name was Petra Holloway," he said. Lina said nothing. "She didn't go to Vancouver," he said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 2 degrees. Lina held very still, the way small animals hold still when something large passes nearby. "I see," she said, which was not quite lying and was the most she could manage. Ashmore looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "I need to know everything you found," she told him. "All of it, from memory, the numbers landing clean and precise, because that was the only way she knew how to do anything, completely or not at all." She watched him listen with his arms crossed and his eyes slightly narrowed, the way someone looks when they're running the figures in parallel, checking her work in real time. He didn't interrupt. He didn't write anything down. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if she'd made a mistake. Then he said, "You could have used this." Lina looked at him. "Used it? What you found? Against me? Or sold it? I'm aware of that. Why didn't you?" It wasn't really a question, but she answered it anyway. "Because I need this job," she said, "and because if I used something like that as leverage against you, I would deserve whatever happened next." He was quiet again, looking at her with something that wasn't exactly respect but might have been its precursor. The beginning of something. "We have a problem," he said. "Your problem," Lina said carefully. "I've been with the company 2 years. I didn't put those numbers there." "No," he uncrossed his arms. "But you found them, which means whoever put them there knows you can find them, which makes you part of the problem whether you want to be or not." Lina absorbed that. She thought about her apartment in Dartmouth, the broken radiator, the tiles she'd been meaning to replace. She thought about the fact that she had approximately $900 in savings, and no one who would notice she was gone for at least a week. She thought about Petra Holloway, who had not gone to Vancouver. She said, "What do you need?" What Ashmore needed, it turned out, was someone who could work fast and invisibly, and without leaving a trail, going through the last 14 months of records across all 11 companies and pulling out every transaction that touched the shadow ledger. It was exactly the kind of work Lina was best at. It was also, he told her, time-sensitive in a way he didn't fully explain, but the weight of it sat in the room like smoke. He left her his direct number, which Decker had never given her. He told her he'd return in 48 hours. He did not say please. He did not say thank you. He left the way he'd arrived, with that particular quality of movement that doesn't acknowledge the space it passes through, as though rooms were just weather. Lina sat very still for a few minutes after the door closed. Then she got up, made coffee, and got to work. She didn't sleep in those 48 hours. She went home twice, once to change, once to eat something real. But mostly she stayed at the desk, moving through the records with the focused efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years learning how money hid itself. She found 7 insertion points in the ledger. She found 4 ghost vendors. She found a pattern in the transfers that suggested whoever had built the shadow books had help from someone who currently worked in Ashmore's legal department. She was writing up that last part, 3 in the morning, when something hit her. She'd been moving files between her personal hard drive, which she'd plugged into the office machine to keep everything off the company network, and the printed working copies she kept locked in her bag. This was procedure. This was careful. This was exactly how she'd been operating, except that around hour 36, her hands had started shaking badly enough that she'd had to put her pen down, and her vision had gone strange and tunnely at the edges in a way she'd been ignoring, because she didn't have time to not ignore it. And now at 3 in the morning, she realized the shaking hadn't stopped, and her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety. She pressed her hand to her sternum, took 3 slow breaths. It didn't help. She thought, "I should eat something." She thought, "I'll finish this section first." She went back to the papers. At 3:47, she stood up to get more coffee and hit the floor. Not dramatically. There was no warning crash, no film moment collapse. She simply sat back down, very fast, because her legs had made it clear they were done cooperating. She put her head between her knees and waited for the darkness at the edges of her vision to recede and thought, with a clarity that was almost funny. "I've done it again. This is the 3rd time in 4 years. You'd think I'd have learned by now. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 31 hours. She'd been running on caffeine and stubbornness and the particular kind of adrenaline that comes from a problem you're genuinely good at solving. Her blood pressure, when she managed to focus enough to take it on the little cuff she kept in her desk for exactly this reason, read low enough that she made a noise she hoped the empty building didn't hear. She could not go to a hospital. Not with what was in her bag. Not with what she knew. She could call a cab and go home and lie down and hope it passed. She reached for her phone to do exactly that and saw a text from Ashmore. It had come in 40 minutes ago. She'd missed it. It said only status. Her thumbs moved before she'd fully decided to let them. She wrote back, "Done. Need another 2 hours to write it up clean," then, because apparently she'd left something functional in her chest that was adjacent to honesty, she added, "Having a health issue. Not serious. We'll have everything ready. She hit send before she could reconsider. The response came in 11 seconds. Address. Corbet Ashmore arrived at the office at 4:20 in the morning, and whatever she'd expected, a check-in, maybe a driver dispatched to take her home, was not what walked through the door. He came in without knocking, which, technically, had been true the first time as well, but the first time she'd been upright. This time she was sitting on the floor with her back against the desk and her knees up because that was the position that had been most consistently keeping her conscious. And she looked up at him from there and felt something that wasn't quite embarrassment, more like the exhaustion that comes from having nothing left to protect. He crouched in front of her. Not the way someone crouches who is performing concern, the way someone crouches who needs to assess a situation. "How long?" he said, "since I hit the floor?" "About 40 minutes. Before that, I've been..." She stopped. "About 30 hours without food. Longer without enough water. My blood pressure's low." The look on his face was the same one he'd had in the meeting, that particular controlled blankness, but something underneath it was different. Harder. "You didn't say anything. I had work to finish." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect from a man like Corbet Ashmore. He said, "That was not a smart choice." "No," Lina agreed. "It wasn't." He didn't move immediately. He was looking at her the way he looked at numbers, working out variables. "Can you stand?" "Probably. Give me a minute." She made it to her feet, which was a partial victory, and managed 3 steps toward the desk before he moved, and she realized he was simply there, not touching her but close enough that if she listed significantly in any direction she'd hit him instead of the floor. Which was, she suspected, the point. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not," he said, not unkindly. "Sit." She sat. He went to her desk, opened the bottom drawer as though he already knew the layout. Had he memorized it? She was too tired to be surprised, and pulled out the granola bar she kept there as emergency food and the bottle of water she kept there as further emergency food. He handed both to her. She ate. She drank. She didn't thank him because he hadn't been particularly gentle about it, more transactional, which was fine. Which was easier, actually, than kindness would have been. After a few minutes, her hands stopped shaking. After a few more, the tunnel vision retreated. Ashmore had gone to stand near the window. The Halifax waterfront at 4 in the morning looked like a movie set of itself. All those lights on the dark water, the container terminal lit up on the far side. He had his hands in his coat pockets, and his back mostly to her, giving her space, she thought, in the particular way of a man who understood the value of not being looked at while you reconstituted yourself. "The summary," she said. "I need to finish the summary. It can wait." "It can't. An hour won't change what the numbers say. An hour might change what happens to me," she said quietly, "if I don't have everything documented properly." He turned then, looked at her with those grey eyes. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said, and the flatness of his voice made it sound less like reassurance and more like policy. She held his gaze. "You'll understand if I need more than your word for that." Something happened in his expression. Not softening, more like the recognition of a sharp edge. "Fair," he said. She finished the summary. He waited, which was either professional patience or something she didn't have a word for yet. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't pace. He stood near the window in that contained weather before it happens stillness, and she was aware of him the way you're aware of something with gravity, not dramatically, just as a constant in the room. She printed 3 copies of the summary and put them in a sealed envelope, and wrote Ashmore on the front, and handed it to him. He took it without opening it in front of her, which she hadn't expected. "Do you have someone who can take you home?" he said. "I can take a cab." He looked at the window, then back at her. "Decker will drive you. Decker hates me. Decker doesn't hate anyone. He's constitutionally indifferent." Something moved near his mouth that wasn't quite humor, but shared a border with it. "He'll drive you home." Decker drove her home. He was, as described, constitutionally indifferent. Said nothing the entire drive, didn't ask how she was, didn't comment on the hour or the circumstances, simply drove and stopped in front of her building and waited until she was inside. She appreciated it more than she could have explained. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, there were 3 things on her kitchen counter that hadn't been there when she went to sleep. A bag of groceries, real groceries, not the cheapest at the store variety, the kind with actual protein and vegetables that took effort. A bottle of electrolyte drink. And an envelope with her name on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened the envelope with her pulse doing something she chose not to examine. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number at the top, her full year's salary, doubled, and 2 lines beneath it in the same handwriting. For the work, and for not saying a word. No signature, none needed. She sat down at her kitchen table. She looked at the number for a long time. She thought about Petra Holloway. She thought about the shadow ledger. She thought about Corbet Ashmore crouching on the floor in front of her at 4 in the morning with a granola bar in his hand. Not gentle, not performatively concerned, just present and competent, and she was realizing this slowly, more careful with her than she'd been with herself. She thought about the past 2 years. All the careful quiet, all the columns kept clean, all the questions she hadn't asked. She'd been surviving, she understood that now, surviving and calling it living and not looking too hard at the difference. She thought, this is not a man who doubles someone's salary because he's generous. She knew him well enough already to know that wasn't what this was. This was a man who paid what he owed, who kept accounts the way she kept accounts precisely, completely, without rounding down. She thought, I'm in this now. She thought, I was in this the moment I pulled that file the second time. She put the letter back in the envelope and stood up and opened the groceries and started making breakfast, real breakfast, eggs and toast and the kind of orange juice that comes in a carton and not a bottle of concentrate. And while she cooked, she let herself feel something that was either foolish or earned or both. Ashmore called her 3 days later. Not Decker. Ashmore. On the direct line he'd given her, he said, the person in legal. Yes, she said. The timing on the transfers maps to 3 specific dates. 2 of them correlate to dates the legal team had board access. Only 1 person was on the building records for all 3. A silence, then, I need you to testify to that, to the nature of the records. Internally, internal investigation, yes. She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. All right, she said. Another silence. Different from the first one. You know this makes you a witness. I know. Which means I have an obligation to. He stopped, chose different words. You'll have security. For the duration. Lina looked out her window at the Dartmouth street below, at the November grey of it, the bare trees and the wet pavement. I don't need a babysitter, she said. Ashmore said in a tone that suggested he was reading from a very short and firm internal document, is not the same question as what I'm going to provide. She should have been irritated. She wasn't. She wasn't sure what she was. Fine, she said. Fine, he said. She hung up first, which she suspected he noticed. The security detail materialized the next morning, 2 men she didn't know, who stationed themselves at neither visible nor invisible distances, and did not speak to her unless spoken to, which suited her. They drove her to the office. They waited in the hall. They drove her home. Ashmore appeared in person on the 4th day. He came in the middle of the afternoon, while she was working. She was always working. This was the constant of her life. And he sat across from her desk, which no one really did. Everyone who came into this office either stood awkwardly or perched on the edge of the chair like they weren't planning to stay. Ashmore sat in it like furniture, like a space that was meant to accommodate him. The internal process is moving forward, he said. The person in legal has been suspended pending full review. Lina nodded. Good. He was looking at her desk, at the papers, at the frayed cuff she still hadn't gotten rid of. She kept forgetting or not quite getting around to it, or finding something more pressing. You're still here by 7 in the morning, he said. I'm a morning person. Decker says you've been here past 11 most nights. Decker is constitutionally indifferent, and also apparently reporting to you about my hours. I asked him to. She looked up from the papers. He was watching her with that expression that gave nothing away and still somehow communicated everything. That he was paying very close attention, had been for longer than she'd realized. Why, she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you are not careful with yourself," he said, "and I find I have an interest in the situation being otherwise." The room was very quiet. The dry cleaner below them was closed at this hour, the hiss and thump of its machines gone. Outside, Halifax in November, all that cold Atlantic air and the smell of the sea. "That's a very particular thing to say," Lina said. "Yes," Ashmore said. He didn't qualify it. She looked at him, at the grey eyes and the jaw and the hand that held itself slightly differently, and the coat that cost more than her monthly rent, and the stillness that had been the first thing she'd noticed, and was still, after all of this, the thing she noticed most. She thought, "I have $900 in savings and broken tiles in my bathroom. And I have been surviving for 4 years and calling it a life." She thought, "This man doubled my salary and brought me groceries and stood in my office at 4 in the morning on a Wednesday, as though it was simply where he was meant to be." She thought, "I don't know what this is." She thought, "I know exactly what this is." "You should know," she said carefully, "that I am not someone who can be managed." "I know," he said, "or leveraged. I know that too, and that whatever this is." She stopped. "I don't do things halfway. I'm not built for it. If I'm in completely." Ashmore looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in the grey of his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but the potential for it, the room where warmth lived when it was resting. "I'm aware," he said, "of how you work." She held his gaze. "Then we understand each other." "Yes," he said. "I believe we do." He left 20 minutes later, after asking 3 precise questions about the marine company receivables and getting 3 precise answers. He put on his coat and walked out, and the room was ordinary again in his absence, in the way rooms are when something with weight and gravity vacates them. Lina sat at her desk for a few minutes. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. She was smiling slightly, though there was no one there to see it. The columns were clean, the numbers were honest, and for the first time in 4 years, she thought that the life she was building might actually be worth the counting.